Story 1.
The night of Santo Amaro. In a small town surrounded by woods and hills, a young man agreed to spend the night at his aunt's house, right across from the Santo Amaro cemetery. He wanted to prove that nothing supernatural existed. He wanted to silence the voices that claimed the house was haunted. The aunt was left alone when her husband, a baker, left for work at dawn. She said that entire nights were interrupted by noises, by bicycles falling, by knocks on the window, by something walking inside the house. She was exhausted, so thin that her clothes seemed to dress a ghost. Her sunken eyes revealed sleepless nights. Her hands trembled even during the day, and she jumped at the slightest sound. Her husband was beginning to doubt her sanity. The neighbors whispered behind her back that she was making up stories for attention. Some suggested she should be committed. Others said it was just nerves. The aunt herself began to question her mind. Maybe she was truly insane. Maybe the nights of terror were only the fruit of an exhausted imagination. Her nephew, a young university student who didn't believe in superstitions, saw her suffering and decided to intervene. He promised to spend an entire night in the house to prove once and for all that everything was nothing but fear and imagination. "I'll show the whole family there's nothing wrong with you. Aunt, you just need some rest," he said, confident that by morning he would have unmasked the mystery. But there was something the aunt hadn't told him. In recent weeks, the phenomena had intensified. They were no longer just noises. She felt presences touching her hair at night, saw shadows passing behind the curtains, heard whispers in a language she couldn't recognize. One night, she had awakened with finger marks on her arm, purple, as if someone had gripped her hard. She didn't tell her nephew because she knew he wouldn't believe her, and because she herself was beginning to doubt what she saw and felt. The house was simple, without electricity, only oil lamps and the moon. The door was a curtain. Sacks of rice were stacked, forming a step. Sheets of zinc leaned against old bicycles. The air smelled of earth and the gunpowder of old lamps. The setting seemed made for a test of courage, but also prepared for an encounter with the unseen. The Santo Amaro cemetery stood just a few meters from the house's window, separated only by a low wall of ancient stones. By day, one could see wooden and iron crosses rising from the red earth, some leaning with time, others broken by storms. At night, however, the cemetery turned into a dark mass that seemed to breathe, a dense shadow stretching beyond the wall's limits. The young man watched from the window as his aunt prepared the lamp for sleep. There were stories about that cemetery, stories he dismissed as small-town folklore. They said fugitive slaves had been buried there, that violent deaths had occurred on the land even before it became a cemetery, that the soil had been cursed since colonial times. The aunt showed him the room where he would sleep, the same one where she had endured her haunted nights. The mattress leaned against the wall that faced the cemetery. Rice sacks formed an uneven barrier across the floor. Old bicycles cast twisted shadows in the lamp's faint light. "You can move the mattress if you like," she said. But the young man refused. He wanted to experience exactly the same conditions she lived in. When the aunt withdrew to the other room, the young man was left alone with his scientific determination and his lamp flickering like a nervous heart. The silence of the house was complete, broken only by the wind, making the curtain door tremble lightly. He lay down, fully dressed, with the lamp within reach, ready to unmask any trick of the subconscious or imagination. In the middle of the night, the curtain moved with a breeze that seemed to come from inside the house. The young man heard the latch of the window being undone, a slow metallic sound, as if someone were teaching a lock how to open. The hairs on his arm stood on end, his body withered like a plant losing water. Footsteps crossed the room between the bed and the sacks of rice, steps with weight, not belonging to the wind, steps molded to avoid the objects scattered there. Then a bicycle fell. The crash was dry and fierce. He expected to see something behind the fallen object, but saw nothing. Something passed beneath the bed, a cold brushing like wet cloth sliding by. He felt the breath of something not born of human lungs. The blanket was yanked hard. The fabric slid away from his feet. The young man felt the emptiness where his foot had been, the sensation of an invisible hand holding and pulling. He wanted to run. The urge came like a command, yet his body remained frozen. The presence seemed to anchor his heart. His mouth went dry. The noisy silence made the sound of his own breathing an accusation. He tried to scream and failed. His throat closed as if squeezed by a hand. The aunt on the other side of the curtain heard the noises. She came to the door, holding the lamp in trembling hands. Its small light like a boat in stormy seas. Together, they saw shadows, moving things. Papayas inside a box were hurled to the floor. The seeds rolling and clinking like broken coins. The sound filling the house as altered proof. The intruder climbed onto the stacked sacks, leaving invisible marks in the air. The curtain shivered as if kissed by something deep. The bicycle that had been leaning rolled as if moved by a body. The young man felt the ground slip beneath his feet, as if the house itself had decided to tilt to one side. In a moment that seemed to last ages, the creature approached the window. It traced its fingers along the curtain, and the window banged once, slow and dry. That sound opened an ancient fear in the soul. The fear of things that do not speak and yet communicate intent. When the entity pulled the blanket, the young man felt something probing his skin, as if life itself were being squeezed and drained, little by little. The blanket came away. He rolled across the mattress, hit the wall, fell beside his aunt. He had no voice. There was only happening. He remembers time stretched out, seconds too long, his mind trying to stitch together disjointed images, his body obeying against his will. The house groaned in unexpected ways. The air grew thick. Cold sweat covered his skin. A smell of earth and old ovens drifted through the room. For an instant, everything ceased. Silence returned as presence. The night ended in prayers. Aunt and nephew prayed until the morning light invaded the house. The lamp grew weak. The shadows withdrew without haste. When the sun rose, nothing was out of place. The bicycles stood upright. The window was locked. The box of papayas was whole. Yet, the young man knew something real had happened. The proof was not in the objects that could be touched, but in the sensation that lingered in his body, an invisible wound that never healed. He did not speak for days. When he told neighbors and relatives, many said it was invention. Some laughed, few listened in silence. Years later, now an old man, he remembers that night with the sharpness of one returning to a place where part of himself was left behind. He believes, with the certainty of one who has felt, that there are presences walking parallel, occupying spaces between the concrete and the sensed. He no longer wishes to face what cannot be seen. The experience left in him a kind of protective clause that makes him avoid houses with curtains instead of doors. From that night on, he was never the same. Small decisions became more cautious. Doors, once left open, were now locked. Windows reinforced. His body reacted before thought appeared. A recurring shiver crossed his back whenever he passed the cemetery. The aunt never again slept alone. She rearranged the house in her routine, placed a wooden object on the window which she said offered protection. The family began to pray more often. Neighbors avoided the side of the street where the house stood. Some whispered about ancient curses. Thus, the memory of that night gained layers of collective care. Today, he shares the memory in silence, telling it only when he senses attentive eyes. Each retelling became a warning. Each silence became a safeguard. The story remains alive in the voices that still whisper about Santo Amaro, because not all rest in peace. Stay sharp, everyone. To all our amazing viewers and loyal subscribers, we know many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy these stories and want to support this project, please hit subscribe, give the video a like, and share it. Now, enjoy what's coming up.
Story 2.
An unwanted visit. In a small town nestled among dry hills. An ordinary family found themselves at the epicenter of a series of terrifying events that defied logic and sanity. It all began in the most trivial way: a simple dinner. The inexplicable soon became tangible. The once welcoming home turned into a haven of sudden illnesses, pointless arguments, and a heavy atmosphere that seeped into the walls like mold. The family felt surrounded not by thieves or hostile neighbors, but by something invisible that fed on their happiness and drained their peace. The question was no longer, "What is happening?" but rather, "What will we do to survive?" It all began with a simple purchase. The father, a tall and robust man, had found a new butcher shop in town and brought home a piece of meat that looked flawless. Wrapped in plastic, fresh and healthy, the meat appeared normal in every way. The mother placed it in the freezer, planning to prepare it for Sunday dinner. Days later, when she took out the package, she noticed something strange. The meat was frozen, yet an unusual dampness covered it. She dismissed the detail, blaming the freezer. But when she placed it in the pot, came the second warning: the smell. It wasn't the metallic scent of raw meat, of blood, but something earthy, like damp soil. She tried to convince herself it was just a different kind of freshness. As it cooked, the odor intensified. It didn't vanish with the heat, as one would expect, but instead spread through the kitchen, seeping into the walls and curtains. When the fire was finally turned off, they waited a few minutes for it to cool. Hungry, they gathered around the pot. The father lifted the light and jumped back in horror. What had once looked like juicy meat was now a writhing nest of live worms, twisting in a nauseating mass. The stench was unbearable. The mother screamed, the children recoiled, and the father, disgusted, quickly shut the pot. They threw everything into the trash in silence, consumed by both nausea and the dreadful certainty that what they had just seen was not normal. From that day on, nothing was the same. Small disagreements turned into violent quarrels. The children began to fall ill with unexplainable fevers, persistent coughs, and nightmares that made them wake up screaming. The once vibrant mother grew pale and apathetic, as if her very life had been drained. The father, once patient and firm, became irritable and distant. The atmosphere of the house had changed. The lights seemed dimmer, the corners darker. At times, they felt as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. Their home, once a refuge, had become a spiritual battlefield. Driven by fear and despair, the mother suggested calling a priest. She had heard stories of cursed objects and of evil feeding on entire families. The father, though skeptical, could no longer deny that something greater than him was tearing apart everything he loved. The priest arrived on a hot afternoon. He was a man of calm voice and serene expression, but the moment he entered the house, he felt the suffocating weight in the air, as if pain and fear had long soaked into the walls. He explained that he would not perform a formal exorcism, but rather a blessing prayer for peace and protection. Gathered in the living room, they knelt beside him. The priest began his prayer, asking that divine grace cover the household. That was when the heavy silence broke. A sound echoed from outside the metal front door. A deep, animalistic growl, followed by violent pounding that made the door rattle on its hinges. The scraping of claws against the metal filled the house. The children cried. The mother trembled, and the father froze, staring at the door in terror. The priest held his voice steady, though fear gnawed at his insides. In his thoughts, he wondered, could it be the family's dog? Why don't they bring it in before it disrupts the prayer? But when the mother, between sobs, whispered, "We don't have a dog, and no one in the neighborhood has an animal like that," the priest understood the gravity of the situation. It wasn't a dog. It was the devil itself, enraged, trying to break the blessing. The noise grew louder, claws scratching metal, blows like a beast trying to smash through, and a roar so strong it shook the table. Yet the priest raised his voice higher. May the peace and protection of the Lord extend over this family. His prayer became a shield, and with every word, the creature seemed more desperate, until suddenly it all stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The heavy air lifted, and the tension seemed to drain from the house like smoke. Panting, the priest turned to them and said, "Do not be deceived. That was no animal. It was evil resisting the blessing." The family wept in relief, and the priest emphasized that God's grace had manifested, but the spiritual battle was not over. It was essential to remain in faith, in prayer, and in unity, so that the evil presence would never find its way back. The phenomena ceased. The family regained peace, though forever scarred by the experience. The priest, once serene, now believed even more firmly in the true power of the supernatural and the effectiveness of prayer against unseen forces. Yet deep inside, each of them carried the memory that not everything can be explained, and that some spirits, once awakened, never truly vanish. Not all rest in peace.